also am a clinical supervisor where I work with students and interns getting their clinical hours around psychedelic integration. So excited to be here today. We'll start here with Dr. David Smith. Welcome. So Dr. David Smith is the founder of the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic in San Francisco that he founded in 1967. We really stand on the shoulders of you and being here today. He is a medical doctor in addiction medicine. He was the past president of the American Society of Addiction Medicine and the California Society of Addiction Medicine. He is also the past medical director of the California State Department of Alcohol and Drug Programs and the California Collaborative Center for Substance Abuse Policy and Research.
Woo!
And then we have Gisele Fernandes-Osterhold, who is the Director of Facilitation for Psychedelic Therapy at UCSF. She is also a faculty member at the California Institute of Integral Studies and a mentor at the Center for Psychedelic Therapies and Research. She has also been a practicing psychotherapist for over 25 years, specializing in the treatment of trauma using integrative approaches rooted in somatic, humanistic, existential, interpersonal psychology. And also works at the UCS lab here with Andrew and Ellen. And then we have Andrew Penn, who is a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner, a clinical professor at UCSF School of Nursing, and a researcher of psychedelic medicine. He is studying the effects of psilocybin and MDMA in the Translational Psychedelics Research Lab at UCSF for the treatment of depression and patients with Parkinson's disease. He is also the co-founder of the Organization of Psychedelic and Entheogenic Nurses. And then we have Dr. Ellen Bradley, who is a clinical psychiatrist and a professor of psychiatry at UCSF Wheel Institute for Neurosciences and a researcher of psychedelic medicine. She has been involved in several research studies exploring the use of psychedelic compounds such as psilocybin and MDMA at also the Translational Psychedelic Research Lab at UCSF. And her career has been focused on the treatment of mental health and substance use disorders, and recently researching the therapeutic effects of psychedelic medicine in the treatment of depression, anxiety, and patients with Parkinson's disease. So welcome, everyone. So my first question is for Dr. Bradley. Could you please outline and share with us the studies that you are currently working on?
How's it sound? All right? Okay. Thanks everyone for being here. It's really an honor to sit up here with everybody, and thanks for that great introduction. I appreciate it. So at the Translational Psychedelic Research Program that all three of us are a part of, that's kind of a mouthful, I know, we just call it TRIPPER. It's a lot easier. At TRIPPER these days, we are most focused on studies that are really targeting folks who are living with three different health issues. One is Parkinson's disease, another is bipolar disorder, and specifically bipolar depression, and the other is chronic pain. And the reason that we're really focusing on those issues for now is because those are areas where we know patients desperately need new treatment options, and there has been little, if any, work in the formal research in psychedelic options there. So that's most of our work, and then we also have a bit of work exploring, the potential new psychedelic agents. We have one study where we enroll folks who don't have any health problems, and we're looking at the effects of psilocin, which is a drug related to psilocybin, versus psilocybin to try to understand the potential of psilocin as another treatment option for use.
Okay, and then Andrew, I'd love it if you could share with us the considerations you make around safety for the psilocybin studies you work on, and how do you choose the participants for these studies?
Yeah, So thank you for that. With research, it's so different than what we might call naturalistic use. And so anytime you're doing a research study, there's a couple of things that you have to, there's a lot of things you have to keep in mind, but two of the big ones are the people in your study, do they have the condition that you want to study? So we call that inclusion. And then we're operating out of an abundance of caution at this stage. And so some of the things that we might be checking for is to make sure that somebody's cardiovascular system, their heart, their blood pressure, can handle the increased blood pressure and heart rate that you see with things such as psilocybin and psilocin. We're looking to see if they have any particular psychiatric history. So generally, one of the reasons why it's noteworthy, some of the studies that Ellen talked about, is that historically, when you do studies, you start with a very specific group of people, which honestly, the vast majority of people are not a part of. So if you've had, if you have uncontrolled hypertension, for example, you can't be in these studies. If you've had a progressive neurological disease like Parkinson's disease, you would have been excluded from these studies. If you have bipolar disorder, either type 1 or type 2, you would have been excluded from these studies. And so we have some degree of information from previous studies with this very well described population. And what you do in science is then you start going a notch further out. You say, okay, can we do this safely with, say, patients with a defined progressive neurological disease like Parkinson's disease? Now we can't apply that finding necessarily to people that have like Lou Gehrig's disease or something like that. But it's another piece of information. So these studies that we're doing right now in our lab are groups of people that historically would not have been able to be included in these other studies. So there's lots of things that we look at that I won't bore you with the details, but they're all intended to make sure that the safety of our participants is thought about, and that the integrity of the data is really sound, because this is how we move science forward. So I hope that answers that to some extent.
Thank you.
We'll also be asking questions at the end, so start thinking about your questions and any of the specialties that you see here up on stage as well.
So Gisele, as the Director of Facilitation and Design Protocol for Psychedelic Therapy, what are the principles of facilitation? Can you share with us the importance of preparation, therapy, and integration? And with that, what challenges do you currently face in your work coming from a transpersonal, whole person perspective in therapy, moving away from the traditional symptom reduction and cognitive behavioral approaches?
Thank you, Jen. Good afternoon, everybody. It's Bicycle Day. Welcome. So nice to be here with you. Historical day in San Francisco. So who here has had a psychedelic experience before? Okay, so we have a room of friends. And who here is from the mental health field? All right, so we have an overlap. That's good news. But not a lot of people. So I want to put into context from a mental health perspective when we're talking about the context of research, medical research. So when psychedelic experience inside of a medical research context is serving vulnerable populations, right? People who have, for the most part, tried different treatment modalities, have tried different medications, and have not felt better. That's how they end up in a clinical research. A lot of people who have access to psychedelics would say, I would never go to the lab and take psychedelics, that must be horrible. And then you have two therapists looking at you. And so there's kind of that stigmatization of mental health still. And there is this idea that in order to have a productive or a healing or a worthwhile psychedelic experience, you would want to be in a music festival, you would want to be in nature, you want to be with your friends or by the river. So those are fantastic experiences, as most of you probably had those experiences. I don't need to tell you about that. But the context in which we're working with, it's a different context. It's a context of people who wouldn't necessarily have a good time by the river at the music festival, because they are trying to treat something specifically that they live with, and it's a source of suffering, right? So that's the context. So I think it's important to understand that. And so when they come in, one of the principles that we like to work with is this concept of the whole person. And so while people come in and they have symptoms, and they have ways in which they're functioning that are difficult to their life, and they can't really relate or live their lives in the way that feels good to them, sorry, I just lost my thread here for a second. It's feeling emotional to be here with you. The mental health system tends to quantify and minimize their experience to their symptoms. So the whole person approach is one in which we're looking at the totality of who the person is, right? So what kind of lives they led, what are the strengths that they have in their day-to-day, where do they go to school, who's part of their lives, what kind of hobbies they have, what are the things that they do that make them feel better? When do they notice that those symptoms make them feel worse? What have they tried before? And so that whole assessment of their psychological, emotional, developmental history is part of what we do. So we have 3 meetings of 2 hours each in preparation for a psychedelic session, where besides that history taking and getting to know them, establishing a rapport, we're also going to provide psychoeducation around what a psychedelic experience is and how they can better utilize the opportunity. Some people come in with previous psychedelic experience, and some people have never had an altered state of consciousness experience. So they need to be oriented, understand how that is going to impact their sensations, their thoughts, their feelings, and how to navigate that day. Along with that, we discussed expectations. So what to expect, how can they behave, so they can talk or they can be quiet. They have music and eye shades and blankets, but if they feel like standing up and moving around, they can do that too. So there's a variety of ways of being able to engage with themselves, with the process during the day, as well as a way of engaging with the facilitators and asking for support when that is needed. The intention setting, for those of you who were here before, for Jim Fedman and Jordan, they were talking a lot about the multiplicity of the psyche that is part of our prep too. So when somebody comes in, there's always aspects of the self that are familiar to us, that we know, that are connected to aspects of our identities, are connected to the parts of ourselves that we like, that are the parts that are better known to us, or part of our conscious awareness or of our day-to-day. But then there's the other parts of the self, the ones that we don't like so much, the ones that are unconscious, the ones that are hidden away or repressed due to traumatic history. So part of PrEP is working through supporting participants in getting acquaintance with all those parts. Because there's usually a part of themselves who wants to be in the research study, wants to take psychedelics, wants to heal. But there's also a part that doesn't. There's a part that is afraid. There's a part that has a lot of hesitations and questions about that. There's a part that, if I didn't have these symptoms, I don't know what my life would be like. Maybe I'm better off this way. So there's lots of different polarities and multiplicity of thoughts or feelings and of experiences that the better we support people getting acquaintance to that, the better they were able to utilize the intervention, because chances are it will come up. Just like you heard, for those of you who were in this room before, intention setting is also one of the principles of what we work with. So preparing people to a psychedelic experience, what do you want out of this, right? Well, what are the motivations that bring you to the study? And the intentions may or may not fully match what's going to happen. So the expectation and the intention is part of a therapeutic work that one opens up, prepares the psyche in the best way that we can to be able to utilize the experience, and yet leaves space and openness to whatever happens, and then tries to make sense and meaning out of that and learn from that experience. You can be very prepared for a psychedelic experience, you can have your intentions really clear and well thought out, and you may or may not get the outcome of that. And so the importance of having that expectation flushed out, it's key to the outcome. We've had people in our Parkinson's study say, one of my intentions is to heal from Parkinson's disease. So that kind of intention is one that, unfortunately, we can't fully endorse because it's very unlikely that you will heal from Parkinson's. And so part of working with the intentions and finding more appropriate ways of engaging with the possibility of what can happen in a psychedelic session, it's part of the process of helping somebody actually gain something from the experience rather than wanting something that won't happen. And so that it's a little bit of a quick overview of the preparation. There's also, introducing them to the idea of bringing a comfort object, something that can help them during dosing day. Some people bring a stuffed animal, a blanket, a mala, a rock, a picture of a loved one, and as well as collaborating with their family members, a support person that would be there to pick them up after the dosing, and will have them will report on their experience afterwards as part of their support system. So as you see, just by description of this, there's a holistic element here of igniting somebody to be ready for a deep dive. And then they do the dive, and then there's the integration process that I'll probably pause here and talk more about it as we go a second round, because it's a whole other set of principles on board. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you so much, Gisele. And Dr. Smith, how is the Haight-Ashbury Clinic involved in the movement today?
Thank you. I'm absolutely dazzled by this panel. I represent the old generation of psychedelic researchers, beginning with animal studies in 1965 at UCSF, which is my alma mater. Andrew, everybody knows that. And I lived in the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco. In those animal studies, what I did was I put LSD in mice and aggregated them to see how they interacted. And then I put methamphetamine in mice and see how they aggregated it. And then the mice that had amphetamine fought each other, changed in what's called medium dose lethal. Whereas the mice on LSD, they kind of confused their response that they have when they bundle each other and pick each other and hug each other, and it turned mice into a little kind of confused loving mice. Why do you think that's of interest? It was of interest to me because it got me a published paper. But I also observed that because I lived in the Haight-Ashbury, and unlike this distinguished panel, my research laboratory was Golden Gate Park, of which you took several thousand hippies, gave them LSD, put them in front of Grateful Dead music, and saw what happens. And they were like twirling, loving mice. And if they had a bad trip, another one of them would take care of them. And then the police didn't like that, and they would take somebody because he was sitting in a tree and annoying the neighbors. And they'd send him to the ER, and they'd strap him down and shoot him up with thorazine. I said, the ones that stayed in the park did a whole lot better than the ones that were sent to the hospital. So that was really the beginnings of what became the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinics. But that's just part of the story. I had the privilege of going down memory lane with old friends, Carolyn Garcia and Sunshine Kesey. And we talked about the transformative experience, the skill set you had going into the psychedelic experience, and how it ended up. And in this particular situation, I was a physician, psychopharmacologist. I had that skill set. Kim Kesey was a noted author. He had that skill set. He took LSD and an experiment, interestingly enough, that was funded by the CIA. A whole other story. And he called it the revolt of the guinea pigs, and went over the cuckoo's nest. And I started the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinics. One of the reasons I'm dazzled by this is that UCSF, which I love, they said, David, where did you go wrong? Now you have this distinguished faculty up here talking about it. That's the era that I came out of. So I had a spiritual experience, totally changed my life. I saw life in a very different way, crossed over the doors of perception, which you're all familiar with if you've used a drug. And it was transformative. Out of that came Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic in 1967, now Health Right through 68. Several million people have been treated free of charge for a variety of conditions out of something that started in an LSD patient. Now, where did I get the LSD? Well, initially I got it out of UCSF lab, but the statute of limitations is expired. And one of the reasons I'm happy to talk about that is that I was talking with Sonia, who became a dentist at Osley's wife. We never talked about that. I mean, would I say that at the alumni meeting at UCSF? I mean, there was no there. Now I'm sitting with these distinguished faculty members and we can talk about it openly. And when you talk to a lot of people, they will say, I changed my life and went in a humanitarian direction after the psychedelic experience. So I will just briefly go on to my assignment. As I say, I met some people today that have drifted down memory lane. I'll try to get out of the 60s and back into the present year. Part of the studies that I'm interested in is the research that Andrew and Robin and the others are doing at the UCSF because they're scientifically based. Medicine does not accept something unless you can measure it. And it has to be published in a record scientific journal because they're not going to believe something that came out of some other discipline. My goal is to impact on medicine. In other words, there's so much going on out here. I applaud you all, but I have a very narrow focus. I want to introduce spirituality into the practice of medicine. Psychedelics are a route to the introduction of spirituality into the practice of medicine. Medicine knows how to keep you alive, but doesn't know how to help you handle death. And some of the best studies are with psilocybin and death and dying, the fear of death. There's also all the work that's already been described at the UCSF Penn for a variety of psychiatric conditions. My particular focus is on the use of psychedelics in the treatment of substance abuse disorders. And I'm going to share something very briefly that really is not well heard in either the addiction discipline or the psychedelic discipline. The search for spirituality. I happen to be in AA, 12-step recovery. Carl said that Bill Wilson, co-founder of AA, the compulsion to use alcohol is so great that only a spiritual solution would be the answer. AA and spirituality are essential. Psychedelics and spirituality are essential. But if I talk about AA and psychedelic group, the psychedelic group doesn't understand AA, and the AA and addiction treatment field doesn't understand the psychedelic group. But if you look at the literature, page 84, the big book of AA says we've entered the world of the spirit. What do we say after we've had a psychedelic experience? We've entered the world of the spirit. We've transcended ourselves. And the studies with this indicate that if you've had that you do much better in your recovery if you've had a spiritual experience. In fact, I now started psychedelic 12-step groups called spiritual awakening groups. I won't drift into that, but in the AA literature is don't play doctor. And one of the reasons I support everything that we're talking about here, but from a very focused point of view, I want psychedelics viewed as medicine. Why? Because if you view it as medicine, you view it any other way you want, but in medicine, if you view it as medicine, then it doesn't violate the principles of AA. For example, I just had a recent very powerful psilocybin experience because of an athletic injury that I had, and I had flashbacks, and it was very transformative. As you said, I went way beyond the reason I took it, but I didn't have to change my sobriety date because we viewed psychedelics as medicine. They're non-reinforcing. Don't become addicted to them. We view it as medicine. And there should be an integration. And I'll close with this because Jen is to stay on time. The research that I found so fascinating in all the new directions. Yeah, sorry, I don't project that well, and I was told to be sure. Can you still hear me in the back? Okay.
Yep.
Psilocybin, they found, penetrates the neurons and produces an increase in brain-derived neurotropic factors and helps regrow the neurons. That's one of the reasons it appears to have a long-lasting effect, much longer than antidepressants. And some of the studies that UCSF has done, in fact, I think Robin said one of the reasons he started studying it is because serotonin selective reuptake inhibitor, you have to take it every day. Intense psilocybin experience lasts for weeks, way after the drug left the body. So there's the neurotropic growth and the interaction with the default mode neural network that seems to have value. Now, if you accept that principle, science supports it. One of the latest studies is that they're using psilocybin for long COVID. Isn't that interesting? Brain fog. They're finding out that COVID interacts with long COVID is a result of neuroinflammation in the neurons that last way beyond the viral insult. So I think future generations of researchers will broaden it to much broader studies than what we're doing now. And what I am trying to do is get the field of addiction medicine to accept it. For the first time, past president of the American Society of Addiction Medicine, over 7,000 physicians. I just came from the annual meeting. Very little interest. But for the first time, they had a psychedelic study group. So I say the same thing every year, falls flat. Well, it was a molecule of interest in part because of the research. How can you argue with your studies? This is not far out Total Gate Park stuff. This is UCSF. And so I hope what will happen in the future, you'll have mainstream clinicians in addiction medicine and the psychedelic community come together. But that's a wish. We say progress, not perfection. So,
Thank you, David.
Okay, so this question's for Dr. Bradley. So you are a part of the first ever psilocybin study for Parkinson's in the country. Where did this idea come about, and what hopes and expectations do you have for this research, and what are some key takeaways and benefits from your learnings?
Mostly I'm like thinking, how can we lure David back to UCSF? I feel like distracted by that. We can talk about that later, maybe.
I want to meet that mouse that was stuck in a tree on acid.
Well, I also want to say, in all seriousness, thank you for all the groundwork that you did lay at UCSF. It did matter a lot, and has facilitated, what we're doing today, greatly, of course. I think the short answer to the first part of your question, Jen, how did the study come about? The short answer is patients, like people who are living with Parkinson's disease, is why this is happening. This study is it's donor supported, it's supported by people who have relatives living with the illness. And like Andrew mentioned, there's been a few clinical trials now focused on depression and anxiety, but all of those trials had excluded folks living with PT or any neurodegenerative illness at all. So it was just kind of an area that researchers have been afraid to touch. We don't know, what could happen if you give psychedelics to someone who's got this progressive process of brain degeneration happening. And so I think there's a lot of, kind of frustration in that community and questions about could these drugs be useful, and a tremendous amount of need. I think when most of us think about Parkinson's, we probably think about the parts of the disease that we can see. We see it linked to a tremor, maybe a shuffling gait, people who are a bit unstable or moving slowly. But it's kind of like this iceberg disease, where that's the part above the water that you see, but then there are all these other manifestations of the disease, because there's really widespread brain degeneration happening, right? So there's so much else going on for patients. And a couple of the biggest things are anxiety and depression, that most patients are living with anxiety and depression, and that mood dysfunction that people develop when they have PD is actually a much stronger predictor of their quality of life than how bad their motor symptoms are. And I think we see that in clinic. I do my clinical work as a doctor, and I work in a movement disorders clinic with folks who have Parkinson's. And again and again, people will say, I was just in clinic yesterday, and a patient said to me, he was like, it's not really the tremor that has changed my life so dramatically. It is the soul-crushing fatigue. It is the crippling anxiety. It's the fact that I don't want to go to my church anymore because it's just so awful to sit there. And so I'm increasingly disconnected from my community. So a ton of need, not a lot of great treatment options for these folks. So that's really where the idea for the study came from, and our kind of motivation to do it. Although I'm not gonna lie, I was totally scared to do it, and I just want to give a huge shout out to the patients so far who have agreed to participate and partner with us in this research. It takes a very brave, bold person living with a serious illness to say, yeah, sign me up, let's do this. I want to be part of the first study, the first safety study ever in the country. Actually, I don't think there's been one in the world before. So yes, obviously we can't name any of these patients, but just please send them all your love and respect because it's a really big thing to do.
Wonderful.
Are you having a placebo group in that or not?
No, so in this first phase, because we're just focused on safety, it's just an open label study where everybody gets the drug and we use kind of this very conservative dose escalation system. Yeah, so that hopefully that'll come later.
Panel, you got 15 minutes or less?
I should go on to the next.
Okay, yeah. Okay, great. So Andrew, let's see here. Okay, so we know that it is not uncommon for people to experience a heightened sense of physical or emotional intensity or distress during a psychedelic journey. Andrew, can you share with us what happens from a medical standpoint when a participant is experiencing a difficult journey during a dosing session? And what is administered, and can you share your thoughts on that process?
Yeah, sure. So, as a nurse, I'm particularly interested in keeping people safe during their journeys. And we all are, of course, but we have a medical monitor assigned to each dosing session. The safety begins before the session. So, I mean, you can think of this broadly as psychological safety and physiological safety. So, we do a lot of the preparation that Gisele talked about, getting people, some of these folks have never had a psychedelic experience. So this will be their first journey, and we do a lot of, regardless, we do a lot of preparation so people know what to expect. And then during the session, those same therapists are in the room with the patient the whole time. We make an agreement that once they've ingested the dose that they're going to stay for the day. We're in a kind of a living room type environment. Not too many blocks from here, actually, over at the Pritzker building at Mission Bay. Looks like a nice living room. So we do everything to kind of keep the space safe and comfortable. During the session itself, beforehand, we screen for medical contraindications, and we talk about possible physical symptoms that can occur, as well as the emotional, psychological ones. So we monitor things such as blood pressure and heart rate. We make sure that the person stays safe. If we were to get into a situation where somebody was not able to respond to reassurance, either say because their blood pressure is getting high or they're getting very anxious, we do have what we call rescue medications available that I'm happy to report we've never really needed to use. It's very uncommon in psychedelic studies to need to use these medications, so these are things for addressing blood pressure and anxiety. It's good to have them though, and I think it's reassuring for patients to know that we have those available. Generally, reassurance is plenty. Blood pressure generally, with the doses that we're working with, given that we don't allow people in the studies who have uncontrolled blood pressure, we don't allow them to progress in the study. So blood pressure goes up, but not in a way that is particularly dangerous. But we're monitoring all of this during the session, and this is really an essential part of what allows people to really surrender to the experience, is just knowing that we're going to keep them physiologically safe while they're there. And that's one less thing, you're not worried about people coming into the room and disrupting the session. You know that you're safe, you know that you're taken care of. I've had patients ask me, am I going to die during this? No, you're not. You can rest assured that that's not going to happen. And so we do all that to really fine-tune the environment in such a way that makes it for an optimal therapeutic session.
Okay, great. And Gisele, same question, but from a psychotherapeutic perspective, what do you do when managing a difficult session on a dosing day, and how do you support them after?
Yeah, so I'll try to be brief because I see that audience is already ready for questions. Picking up on what we did for prep, so the better prepared the person is in their expectations of what can happen and awareness of the different parts that may show up during a psychedelic session, the better they will be able to navigate the intensity of the drug experience. However, psychedelic experience is hard, and people have a hard time when the unknown aspects of the self come up, when old memories, traumatic memories emerge, or even that dissolution of the self that feels like I'm dying. Where am I? You know, who am I? So all those experiences tend to be very challenging for our ego. And the job of the psychotherapist is to reassure that they're physiologically safe, that they're not going to die. We come sit close to them. Just yesterday I was facilitating a session and I stayed for about 2.5 hours holding her hand. So right in the beginning, the first half an hour, as the drug began to kick in, she said, it's beginning to get dark in here, and I'm feeling scared. And part of her intentions was to let go of the need to control and a lot of anxiety around parenting. Has teenage kids and is having a really hard time as a parent, and is aware that the tendencies to control becomes impossible once you have teenage children. And so as the medicine kicks in, she becomes aware exactly of that, right? Of that edge that wants to control the experience and can't. And then she reached out. So one of the things that we do during prep is we go over physically what it would look like to receive support via touch, so therapeutic touch. And we practice with participants how they feel in sitting closer to us, how they feel asking for help. Some people have a very self-reliant strategy. I'm gonna handle this, I'm not gonna ask for help. So the ability to, even say, hey, I'm having a hard time here, can you come sit close to me? Can you give me your hand? That is something we need to practice with most people, otherwise they suffer alone. And so we prepare for that, and then we also go over the limitations of what kind of touch is appropriate and ethical and supportive, and what kind of touch will not happen during an altered state of consciousness experience, so that when the participant is in that mode and they ask for help, they know exactly what that's going to look like, and they can utilize that support. And just, I saw the time frame here, so one thing that I want to mention is while psychedelic experience is very powerful and can help people move through a lot of their narratives, developmental histories, and overcome fears and come out of it with a different experience of the self and different possibilities for their ways of being and relating, it's not a magic bullet. And a lot of times with people who haven't had a lot of personal work or psychotherapy and they go through a psychedelic experience, it may bring everything up. That depending on the protocol, sometimes we have 2 doses per protocol, sometimes we have 4 doses per protocol, sometimes there is 1 dose in a protocol. So depending on how many opportunities we'll have to work with them, they can flush that out and come out of the study in a different place, but sometimes they won't. Sometimes that experience is just going to get in touch, they will get in touch with, there's a lot more work that I need to do here, and they are aware of that. So part of our work in integration is not only in helping them make sense of the psychedelic experience, understand what came out of it, embody their new narratives and shift their belief systems into ways that are more adequate and fulfilling to their lives, make different choices and support them and all of that, as well as providing a referral for further psychotherapeutic work if the session hasn't been able to be fully integrated. So I think that's an important aspect for people to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, great.
Just reminding everybody, we do have one last session, although it's just in the big room. We just brought time, we're trying to keep time regulated.
Okay, great. David's going to say one brief comment.
I just want to get a shout out to Albert Hoffman. I have the privilege of spending a day with him in Basel, Switzerland, and Linda Kelly of the Haight Street Voice as a description of that article. I did up the path where the bicycle was, and I think he's looking down on this, maybe riding his bicycle up there. But we spent a lot of time talking. He never envisioned any of this. Didn't envision a therapeutic future of psychedelics. His focus was on, he was very interested in ancient civilizations. And he always viewed it in terms of ceremony and intergenerational trauma. As far as I can, we were privileged because I had started the Journal of Psychedelic Drugs to get objective information about it, and he was also interested in that. He didn't quite understand why people had bad trips, so I couldn't talk to him about it. But he did not, what was just talked about, he didn't even envision that. So I think what will happen in the future, stuff will happen. Well, I never thought about that in 2023, but it's an amazing drug world and an amazing interaction with the universe, and I really applaud the organizers of this panel, particularly for Jim to get us all together.
Yeah, shut it up. You mentioned psilocybin-specific alkaloids. Mushrooms have many alkaloids. We're finally getting these labs back and desperately asking people to provide us with. My question is, in therapeutic studies, potentially other alkaloids, synergistic effects, and maybe a lot of magic in some of the other ones that we're just discovering now, and how does that affect maybe future studies?
Everyone hear that?
So we're using synthesized psilocybin. The FDA won't allow you to use ground up mushrooms. So in order to do these studies, FDA approval, we have to use synthesized psilocybin, which we get from the USONA Corporation, which is sponsoring phase 2, well now soon to be phase 3 trials for psilocybin for major depression.
What's the dosing like, remote dose in your environment? How many milligrams of active compounds are you taking?
Yeah, so the dosing range is anywhere between 10 and 25 milligrams. 25 milligrams has become a fairly standard dose. There was a while where a lot of studies were dosing by weight, and there was a report paper that came out of Hopkins a couple of years ago that found that there really wasn't a lot of value to that, and so 25 has become a pretty standard high dose, and 10 usually is on the lower side, so it depends on what you're studying and the protocol.
So back to the research you've done, so would you consider that to be more like microdose versus macrodose, or would you be considering doing also macrodosing studies for some of these patients? And a follow-up question would be, any light on how psilocybin would be applied for future patients in depression and anxiety? So I think there's...
So these are all macrodose studies. We're not studying microdosing. As far as how we're looking at future studies of future treatment of depression, that's to be determined. You know, we're creating the data for which the FDA would then consider FDA approval for these, which would come with some degree of guidance. That is still to be determined. I mean, psilocybin in clinical trials for depression is just entering phase 3 right now. That's the last phase that has to happen before approval, but probably looking at least 2 or 3 years before those studies are completed. So it's still a little ways out.
And those are only the high dose, right? So like, just to add, we're so early, right? Because almost all of the research has been just with these high doses, which is not to say that other doses wouldn't be effective and just work differently, right? There's probably lots of ways to use these drugs, but we're just the beginning.
Over there, yes.
Hi, thank you all so much. That was a wonderful panel. My question is, as a younger person looking to break into this space with only a bachelor's currently, aside from continuing to pursue graduate school and perhaps a PhD, what advice do you have, what steps could we take to break into this space, considering it's not traditionally, it hasn't been studied, it's not available in a lot of grad school programs. So what can I do to, at this stage, kind of get a foot in the door?
Yeah, so from the context in which we're talking about, it's medical research, so that would be a degree in psychology and nursing in medicine, social worker, those would be the degrees who would allow you, and then some specialization on psychedelic assisted therapy. But if the field changes and it gets not only decriminalized but legalized, we might see some different people working to facilitate experiences. I'm not sure for mental health reasons, but there might be other opportunities in the field for different backgrounds. Yeah, to be seen.
I would like to make a comment on that because there are some nurse practitioners at UCSF that are entering into the psychedelics space, and they view Andrew as their mentor. So all career development is mentoring. Find somebody you identify with, look at the work that they do, and then decide what career path you want to go down. And I'm, of course, a big fan of Andrew's. But when I talk to these nurses at UCSF that are in training, they find him as a mentor. And then in the medical area, there are some addiction medicine fellows that have gone into psychedelics. Wow, how did that happen? And they've seen the problem on their ward. I know one I talked to, they never had a family history of alcoholism. And I got the idea, well, maybe psychedelics would help with that. Another, Robin was interested in a large population of homeless substance abusers that are highly traumatized. And I presented that idea, it didn't get anywhere. That's another one of, I got a lot of bad ideas in my life. Well, I think they're good ideas. It's the people I'm trying to impact on. And the idea that this highly traumatized population could benefit from psychedelic therapy is a good idea, but the system is just totally opposed to it.
Yeah.
It'll be a whole different area of the addiction field I think will impact on initially.
So, hi, I have the Haight Street Voice, and Dr. Dave is a dear friend, and we're working on the Haight-Ashbury Psychedelic Center, but I wanted to ask you, because I am in the Haight-Ashbury, and there are a lot of people that said, well, how can I get treatment? I'm not going to send them all up to UCSF, obviously, you don't want a bunch of, but how do I help via the magazine, via working with Dr. Dave, bridge the gap between the basic person that might be from Finland? I had a guy said, I heard I can get, psychedelic-induced psychotherapy. Where should I help these people? Where should I send them? Or how can I bridge the gap between you, obviously awesome medical professionals, to the regular person on the street? How can I bridge that?
Well, jump in a little bit. Well, I get this all the time, being on psychedelic.support. People see my profile around psychedelic integration and then really looking for medicine. Because it's illegal, because of our license, because being on that website, we're asked specifically not to kind of direct that. I would say that's why I got so involved with decriminalized nature in San Francisco.
Yeah.
I think that's why it's really important to get together as a community to really create safe spaces. I think the legalization is so close, and I think it's, I say get your communities ready, find circles that are safe. I see it happening all the time, and I think as we get together as a community, policy can be formed around us and not come down on us and tell us how to do what we're already doing. And so right now, I would say just making sure that there's a sense of safety. I tell my clients or people who call me, only sit in a ceremony with someone that has sat in that ceremony. Don't go online, right? And I think if we can all just get together and come above ground in safe settings and in safe circles, I think we're stronger together, and I think we're seeing that all the time.
Thank you. Thank you.
The other thing that I would just add to that is clinicaltrials.gov is a very easy to use site that all clinical trials have to be registered with, and you can search by condition, by geography, by treatment. Our studies are listed on there. Our lab website is psychedelics.ucsf.edu. You can see the studies that we're doing there, but clinicaltrials.gov allows anybody to find what studies are happening for a specific condition. And I go on there regularly because there's so many. It used to be that I knew most of the literature and most of the studies that were going on, and last time I went on there, I was just surprised at all the studies that have cropped up. So there's more every week, it seems like.
Thank you.
Yeah, and for those of you who saw that film last night that Dr. Dave is in, where it shows the psychedelic movement in the East Coast and the West Coast, and how over here in San Francisco it was all in the park and Haight-Ashbury and people free and the hippie movement, and then you had the East Coast with Harvard and the doctors and the studies around psychology and spirituality, and I think right now this renaissance is about bringing both together.
Yes.
So let's just hold that vision.
I might just mention that this is why Jen and I laughed at each other, because there's this great work going on in the lab, but large numbers of people need psychedelic therapy can't access the study. And we have this Haight-Ashbury Psychedelic Group. I'm going to also give a shout out to Pete.
This is the one that goes around. He was here yesterday. Basically, he's opened up in order to
so much good stuff is happening. So we visited Jen's
I would say I'm a little bit
office,
anti
and I had all these people calling us and referring to Jen. She said, stop referring all these patients to me. In other words, we're still in the dark ages, folks.
Thursday through Sundays.
In my day, when we would have sessions like that, we'd be undercover agents in the audience. Well, I don't think there's any undercover agents out there, but there's still a lot of bad stuff out there. It's terrible. You have a patient in need, you have a proven therapy, a skilled provider. We do a lot of we have psychedelic facilitators that we use, and it's all underground clinic. How bizarre is that? Why is all this flourishing work underground? And remember, there's a large number of people. I, for sure, and I think most of you know the underground. A large number of people that are freaked out about the underground that need psychedelic therapy, and it's just I think Jen is very accurate when she says there has to be a big change in society, and I look forward to the day when Jen says, "Damn, thank you for bringing that patient. Stop."
Right. Okay, how are we for time?
Past.
Past.
Go ahead.
David, do you remember when you had a Corvette convertible during the 1960s?
Yes.
Thank you. You gave me a ride. I was hitchhiking Golden Gate Park to the Haight-Ashbury. Now the question, what I want to make, because you brought up death, so I want to promote, if I may, being a psychedelic gadfly, the book by His Holiness the Dalai Lama called Advice on Dying and Leading a Better Life. It's a fusion of the 5 tattvas, the 5 elements in the Buddhist Hindu tradition, and it's a transfer of all the chemistry in the human body, the liquid, the air, the fire, and the ether, and so forth. And it's a very wonderful description of the transition from one incarnation to the next. Thank you.
And I just want to, well, first of all, thank you. That's the spiritual literature, but I also want to mention I was born and raised in Bakersfield. My grandparents were farm workers. I wanted all my life to have a Corvette. Then I took LSD, sold a Corvette, and bought a VW bus. And he was like, that is the dumbest thing I've ever done. That would be an example. LSD cost me my Corvette.
Any other questions? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering if you're also doing studies on other neurodegenerative diseases besides Parkinson's, and also given that psychedelics have become so much more popular, are you looking at what's happening out in the wild, so to speak, to inform your exclusion criteria? Because I know, like, for example, people in the later stages of Alzheimer's usually aren't in elite studies.
and also people who have cardiovascular disease like you mentioned. I've had a mild stroke, for example. I think I'm so are you looking at what's going on in the wild and using that to inform your
The International Transpersonal Conference.
Yeah, thank you. That's such an important question. But yes, we are.
And plus he called me
because
from Switzerland.
we have very little to go on, right? There's so little research for so long above board. So absolutely, we're looking to, you know, at Reddit, like what people are talking about online, doing interviews to understand more about what folks are doing, what they've learned, you know, through their own experience, for sure, to inform that. And like Andrew said, to hopefully be able to gradually broaden those criteria, right? Include more and more folks safely. Your other question, the Parkinson study is the first study in a neurodegenerative disorder, but we are definitely hoping to expand work in that area. And I think it'll be an exciting area of growth in the next decade or so.
You've been a fantastic audience. Thank you so much. Thank you.